Welcome to week 3. I hope you're doing well. Hope you're enjoying the text. Hope you're enjoying reading each other's Blackboard discussions. There we go. And that you are enjoying your semester at King's University, the King's University, excuse me. Here we are, BIBC 3315, another great week that we have in store for you. We've talked a lot about validation. As you can tell, regardless of what class you have me, I talk about this very significantly. Why? Because I believe that if we get this down, people can be seen, and when they're seen, they can open up and trust. And when they open up and trust, then the opportunity for you as the counselor can create the opportunity for impact. Especially within marriages, understanding Psalm 133:2 that the anointer anoints the head, right? When we think about Psalm 133:2, it's talking about, or is it 33:2? One of the two, excuse me. But in that, it's talking about the imagery of the anointing running down Aaron's head, down his beard, down his garments, and the greatest consumption of the oil being at the bottom. Again, we understand God, the anointer, anointing the head, the authority figure, mom, dad, caregiver, whomever that is, what's ever in them trickles down to the greatest, and the greatest consumption is at the bottom, at the hem of the garment, which is representational of who? The child, the children. And because of that, if we can impact marriages, we can impact families. If we can impact families, we can impact culture. And so in this week, we continue to look at different theories. One of the theories that I wanted to bring to you is the dynamic of, can we continue on a dynamic of wounds, woundedness, hurts, through the way that we go about resolving a marriage? What I mean by that is this. Is there a theory out there that actually articulates that we marry someone like our parents? And I've heard it way too often. Somebody will sit on my couch and say, you're just like your dad. Or you're just like my mom. And there's actually a theory out there where we marry someone that closely reflects the parent that we had, that we have the most unresolved conflict with. I'm going to pause for a second and let that sit in. Now, is that universal? Maybe. Is that 100%? No. You could be the exception. But maybe the exception is that this rule is the exception. I don't know. I put it out there just so that you're aware. Why? Because when you hear these statements, you like to be able to give context. Again, context drives grace, grace thus forgiveness. So I like to try to offer individuals who come in context. Now, again, is it concrete? Depending on if I've worked with them long enough, then as a result of that, the dynamic starts to unveil, and as a result of that, context. If not, then could it be this? Could it be that? And so I share this concept with you because the idea of knowing how important resolution is. There are things out there like EMDR, the rapid eye movement, where basically it's the idea of processing trauma through the formulation of eye movement, which is really fascinating. And it talks about the Dr. Shapiro, who actually created this, that there's a lot of benefit in trauma by doing this. But what we understand about this is that the eyes basically kind of go haphazardly all over. And it happens during REM sleep, that the unconscious, that from my perspective, I believe God is creating a path to the unconscious for the eyes to create. This is actually something that's being researched. I believe it's actually God. That's the part that I'm adding to this thing. I believe God is creating this symmetry within paths. Okay. Now there is research out there that the unconscious is creating a path that's allowing your eyes to mimic some type of path to resolve what it is that you are thinking about, that you're not even aware that you're thinking about. God is a God of wanting resolution. God is a God of bringing things that we're unaware of to our awareness so that we can do something about it. So when we think about the dynamics of resolution, what's in me permeates through me, and I've spent a lot of time actually talking about that. Why? Because it impacts us significantly. I think this is one of the biggest reasons why people have open doors spiritually. Brady, I feel like that all I'm doing is getting my teeth kicked in by the enemy, and I don't understand why, because I go to church, I tithe, I do all these different things. Yeah. Tell me about the last time that you can remember going through something difficult, and tell me how you resolved that. Well, this is what happened to me. Wow, that was really, really impactful. That had to hurt. Yeah, it did. Okay, so that's been a little bit of time. Yeah, that was about 8 years ago. Okay, how did you come to resolution to that? Well, what do you mean? How did you? Because when we go through things, we can either express it or repress it. And if we didn't know to express it, then the caveat is repression. What's in us permeates through us, and as a result of that, because of the law of attraction, is that we can actually attract those type of qualities to us. Well, Brady, you really don't believe that. Well, I'm just submitting it to you. Why? Because again, I communicate, you decide. But there is research out there that supports this type of thought. And so in this, the dynamic is that people can be attracted to qualities of somebody that reminds them of the parent that they had so much unresolved issues with growing up. And because of that, they're unconscious to this. And because of that, they're trying to work out all this repression with their spouse, when really it's their parent that they need to go to. And over time, they get to this place of acknowledgement that, guess what? All the issues that I have, you can't meet. Well, of course, because it's not them. Now, the spouse can actually intensify those unresolved woundedness by what they do, by what they say, by what they don't do, by what they don't say. And because of that, that could cause further triggers. But in this, the idea is by being able to acknowledge, okay, so talking about, and it's the reason why it's a classic illustration of a counselor. Hey, and when people come in my office, they'll sit on the couch and say, are you going to ask me about my mom? And are you going to ask me about my dad? And be like, and I'll say, that's pretty classic, right? And it makes sense that you'd ask that question. Some people will say, well, that's a very Freudian of you. And, okay, maybe. But the dynamic is, what is it that we're after? I want to know from the early formation, understanding that the dynamic of how the mind absorbs in the theta orientation, where the mind is just absorbing as the brain is continuing to grow biologically from the back to the front. I want to know, what was their sense of normal? What were the messages that they're taking in that is now giving them a way of seeing, a way of interpreting, a way of hearing, a way that they believe the reality is? They learn to walk through the mimicking of their parents or their caregivers. They talked as a result of mimicking the sounds and mouthing movements of their parents. Jesus said, I only do what I see the Father doing. That's attunement. That's physics. Right? And so because of that, we see the legitimacy of following in our parents' footsteps. And the dynamic is, I don't want to be like my dad. I don't want to be like my mom. But the dynamic of that judgment, the invisible, the judgment takes, how do I want to say it? The physical orients to the invisible. So if I, from an invisible standpoint, create a judgment, then my physical body orients to that. And now because of that, it impacts the way that I see them. For us as adults, it impacts the way that I see my spouse. It impacts my spouse's way of seeing myself. So as a result of that, those times that those things become triggered, then how is it that we're relating? How is it that we're communicating? So much of the time, someone will say something on my couch and I said, so how do you know that to be true? Well, because this is what happened. Okay, so they said that. No. So they did not say that. No, they did not say that. So how do you know that to be true? Again, people question innately. A lot of times in our role, we're wanting them to doubt what it is they're questioning and us helping them come up with a new question. Well, they're just this. Okay, well, how do we know that to be true? Because of their actions. Okay. What would life look like if that wasn't the case? Well, Brady, that could never... Well, okay. Humor me, if you will. But going back to this very dynamic, if it's in us, then as a result of that, is it going to impact the way that we move forward in time and space, even to the extent of how we choose a spouse? I leave that up to you. I know what I believe, but the dynamic of this education is for us not to indoctrinate you, but to give you the tools and the techniques to be so that you can continue to allow the Spirit of God to dwell not only in you, but to move through you to impact those individuals. You're going to be sitting in that chair. You're going to be sitting across from hurting marriages, hurting family dynamics, and they're going to be saying, "Help me, please." Just as David, search me, O God, and all that dwells within me. If we can do that and allow him to search us so that that fact of healing can happen, then how does that impact us in those early formative years of within just life? But not only that, but choosing a spouse. The times where devastation happens is in marriages and or the need because of a lack of a decision and or the decision that has driven somebody to divorce. And then as a result of that, how is that process so that if there is the desire to marry again, that all those remnants don't continue to dwell within the physical capsule that we know as the body? Because can that woundedness impact how we go about choosing, how we go about interacting, how we go about not choosing, how we go about not interacting? Absolutely. So when people come in from a marriage counseling orientation, and if they come in with two individuals, I always like to tell them, hey, in this process, we may split y'all apart in sessions. I may want to meet with you individually, sir. Ma'am, I may want to meet with you. And ma'am, if you feel more comfortable meeting with a female therapist, I can give you a couple names. But as I want y'all to meet individually with me or with another counselor for a couple sessions, let's say 3. Again, it may need more than that. It may not need that many. But then as a result of that, I want us to come back to this and let's reassess the very thing that brought y'all into this very room. Why? Because what's in us impacts the dynamics of what makes one and one come in together as one. And we see this early on, as if this is your first time of having me, you're going to see that I love studying Genesis 1, Genesis 2, Genesis 1, Genesis 2, because I feel like if that was the orientation of what it was supposed to look like before the fall, then as a result of that, how do we reorient based upon the data, if I can say it that way, of what Scripture indicates? So again, what we see is that God created man, thus mankind, in his image, in his likeness. Fully aware, fully connection, and dependent upon God. As a result of that, through the exhaustion of naming all the birds and animals and what have you, he falls asleep and woman was taken from him. The biological of rib. And I've heard it said, and it's interesting, it wasn't bone from the head or the foot, but the rib. Is that symbolic because of who woman is to man? Now, that creates another dynamic, okay? So people are going to come in, and your theological premise, how do you help individuals that you're going to have people coming in from a different theological understanding to Christianity? Well, Brady, I believe that man is head over the house, and because of that, woman should be submissive to me. If that is your premise, then as a result of that, you should be able to orient within that conversation. But what happens if that isn't your premise? Again, are we there to indoctrinate? Are we there to help them make sure that they're on the same page and both be okay in their uniqueness and in their individualization, so that therefore, if they are, then as a result of that, through their sense of agreement of, yes, I agree with him, yes, I agree with her, great, so that they can actually come into oneness as man, truly masculine, as woman, truly feminine, to be able to come in one in the sanction of marriage. To do what? To represent the goodness of God. To represent the imagery of God. This is why it's good for us to sit there and say, what do I believe? Do I believe that man is over woman? If so, great. Why? Do I believe? No, no, I don't believe that, Brady. That is very that is very ma- just from a place of masculinity type thinking. Okay, then what is your premise and why? Because again, if we can have this resolved within ourselves, it helps us. It helps us so. How do I want to say this? When we have it resolved, these theological premises in us, it helps us not become triggered in a session by the dynamic of this unresolved theological question, and as a result of that, it getting pushed upon because of the woundedness that this question is having for the people that are sitting across from us. Because when people come in, it's not about me. It's not about me trying to come up with the resolve within me. Hopefully, the dynamic is I'm sitting there saying, how do I make it about them connecting with God, and God resolving this very dynamic within them so that as a result of that, it brings them closer to assimilate into one. And going back, can we marry somebody like the parent that we had the most issues with? And if so, then what does that look like to the extent of knowing that if they're fighting about these very dynamics when really it's the imagery of how they see the individual? If they've been wounded by mom, if they've been wounded by dad, then they get married. And as a result of that, the wife does something to trigger in the husband or vice versa. Then whatever had been repressed, now all of a sudden the spouse, through their response, triggers that, and it comes up with a level of intensity. Why? Because we've been walking around with this perspective, with these remnants, with these emotions, with these thoughts, with these judgments, all the way pushed down within us. And as a result of that, actions or thoughts or lack their actions or whatever it may be triggers this, it comes up. And now as a result of that, all that just happened is not only just what was communicated or not communicated, it's also everything that we had pushed down and repressed into the wounded nature of when that event actually happened for mom and or dad. And we're pouring that all through the expression onto the other individual if we don't connect with God first and allow him to come in and resolve that, heal us. And we can see this type of dynamic of repression. And what you're going to find within me is I believe that repression is one of the most detrimental things that we do as humans. It impacts every area of our lives, professionally, academically, financially, relationally, every area. It's not if it comes out, it's when. It's not if it comes out, it's when and how. And so Brady, I was only 3. Okay. Well, the great thing about our God is not hindered by time and space. He can take us back to the very time, if needed, to see how it impacted us so that we can resolve that. And part of that is the idea if he shows us something in our childhood that maybe mom or dad did that caused impact, caused imprint in our subconscious, then as a result of that, what does it look like by saying, God, that hurt? God, that caused me fear. God, that caused me anxiety. Again, validating it by owning it. Because what we see is the dynamic of God doing something, Jesus in the garden, to resolve the very thing that was causing him pain about the idea of going to the cross. He was aware of what he was feeling. He declared what's grounded him in the very moment. Again, our mind, when it sees the body, when it feels the body in pain, it tries to get the body to be unaware of that pain by fixating on the future or fixating on the past, projecting in the future, fixating on the past. But the idea, he was aware, he declared him by the Father into the mix, and as a result of that conversation, to the opportunity of expressing it, getting it out. Because these very dynamics that happen early on in childhood, and this is where, for us being counselors in pre-marriage, I think premarital counseling should be a total emotional inventory. This is one of the first homework assignments that I give working with anybody. Hey, what I'd love for you to do is I'd love for you to spend some time. If they're believers, hey, get alone with God, and I want you to take on a piece of paper, and I want you to write down and ask God, if, will you show me what has come into me that was never intended to come into me? What all emotions, what all decisions, what all what all invisible dynamics has my body oriented to because I have absorbed them? And if I've absorbed them, then they've impacted every proton, every electron, every neutron, every cell. And this is where we get into cellular memories and the dynamic of how the 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 parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system work to the extent of the gut and brain and even the cells within the body, because the dynamic is if there's not something resolved within us, then the dynamic is how do we know what's in us? I always say through the revelation of God, our spouse, or our kiddos are three primary ways. Does your spouse and your kids know within you? No, but we can become pretty triggered pretty quick, and because of that, that is an indicator that there's something in us. Well, Brady, can't somebody just do something in us get mad because of that? Well, of course. But to what level will indicate if there's remnants in us because of something from the past? And how this impacts this very theory is the idea that we so desperately want and need resolve. That subconsciously, we will go marry somebody like our dad, like our mom, with tendencies and attempts to have that tendency that we find so attractive in them, or maybe just the dynamic of the need of resolve that actually attracts us to them, to try to fix that within them, thus within us. But what happens when we understand that it's not them that needs that the dynamic needs fixing, but it's mom and dad? And as a result of that, we get so to a place of overwhelmed and apathy that we look and we say, this marriage isn't working. This marriage isn't working. And a lot of times this is why I want to assess, hey, tell me about mom. Okay. How was your relationship with mom? Okay. Was mom like you? Emotionally, mentally, spiritually? Tell me about mom. Okay. When you got in trouble by mom, tell me about how that was. Tell me how you responded. Tell me how she responded. Tell me. Okay. Awesome. I greatly appreciate that. Hey, tell me about dad. Tell me about dad. Or I'm looking and I'll say, within the questionnaire, your questionnaires can help significantly. Brady, what if they, were adopted? What if mom and dad weren't in the picture? Great. In that, not great, but great to know this, right? Great to know this to the extent of making sure that you don't communicate something that's going to cause pain. Hey, tell me about your caregiver. Tell me about how you interacted with them. Tell me about who they were. Because the greatest needs that we have, just because at a time when we are so vulnerable and in a state of developmental, if those needs go without, neglected, abandoned, or whatever it is, those can drive us to the extent of how we look for marriage, how we look for a mate, how we look for those very dynamics. Well, Brady, I get that met very early, but now I'm not getting it met anymore. Well, why do you think that is? I don't know. Can woundedness within ourselves drive us to the connection of another? Yes. And we see this within Scripture. Now, again, when I communicate this, please, please, please hear me. I'm not orienting this to any state, but just giving context, okay, of how this works. When Jesus gets out of the boat, and I'm trying to think of where this is found in the gospel, that the occult runs to them, the demonic runs to them and says, what are you doing here? Are you here to torment us? We have nothing in common. This dynamic of commonality is crucial. What's in us? And for us as believers, what does it look like to spend time with God? That's what we would consider, maybe call quiet time, of saying, God, what's in me? God, what's in me that you want to talk to me about? God, what's in me that has been dwelling in me so long, or whatever that looks like? God, would you just speak? Speak, for your servant hears, just as Eli told Samuel. And because of that, something amazing took place. Why? Because Samuel was just learning how God was speaking to him. And because of that, Eli told him after the third time, I think it was the third time, Hey, just respond in this manner. Don't come out with preconceived ideas or notions, but just say, speak, for your servant hears. What does it look like for us to say, speak? Just as Jesus did on the Mount of Transfiguration, speak, God. What's inside me? Because what's inside me matters, not only as I look for marriage, but also in the marriage. Not only in the marriage, but how I interact with family, how I interact with children, how I interact with ex-spouses or looking for a new spouse. What in me matters? What's in me matters. This theory could sound so far-fetched that you could debunk it from the beginning, saying, Brady, that's ridiculous. Okay. But again, this is you. You get to determine these things. One thing you'll learn from me as a professor is I'm not here to try to get you to run in any particular path, but for you to understand this journey that you are in academically, so that as a result of that, you continue to invite God into this journey so that He helps you create the foundation of what does it look like to how you feel like you should help people. One of the greatest things that I want to help people is, what is it that's been assimilated in that was never created to assimilate in? The only thing that was created to assimilate in is God. Us inviting Him in. And our spouse. Wow. Think about that. To the dynamic of the most intimate interactions. This is the reason why we go back and look. I said, started in Genesis 1 and 2, and I think a rabbit trail. It happens. Apologize. The dynamic of in that first interaction of mankind, what do we see? We see the perfect nature of God, creating perfect scenery, atmosphere, created a perfect man, and through the perfect man created perfect woman, for them to work to live in oneness. To do one. To do what? To connect with Him, and to be fruitful and allow His imagery to be reflected time and time and time and time and time again. And so when we see the idea of what does that look like for marriage to actually get back to that place of oneness, so that truly masculinity and truly femininity can come together as one. Uniqueness as they may be, amazing and powerful as they may be, in oneness as they connect with the oneness of who God is. Yeah, our environment is going to look a little bit different than what it did in Genesis 2. Okay. One day it won't. But can we walk in that type of imagery? In that type of plan and devotion that God has given us because of what it is that Jesus died for us on the cross. And as a result of that, whether personally, you get to decide, but also professionally, what is it that you believe? And what we see is the remnants of what impacts us in childhood can continue to impact us moving forward. So how do we resolve those very dynamics within ourselves? Is by first hearing a theory such as this and determining what it means to you. Is there any legitimacy? And if so, what would it be? And how would you articulate it to somebody that's sitting across from you? Do you feel the need to articulate it, or do you feel the need of just understanding it so that you have some context? A lot of times when there's family dynamics that are causing issues, I always say, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, just to kind of understand how this interaction goes. Man, Brady, my son we're butting heads. Okay, let me ask you a question. Does your son remind you more of you or your wife? Oh, he reminds me of me. Okay, yeah, makes sense. Well, how does that make sense? Well, you didn't marry someone like yourself, did you? Well, of course not. You married somebody that was probably different than you. Yeah. So, you have any other children? Yeah, sure. There's another theory. We'll talk a little bit more about this, like I said. Do you have another child? Yeah. More like your spouse? Yeah. What's your relationship like? Oh, Brady. I'm like, okay. Yeah. So we can see the dynamics of what's in us and how it impacts our relationships. But crucially within the marriage, and as well as with our children. within the dynamics of family. And we see why family is so important and how do we help families and how do we help marriages. Again, this is a theory I'm submitting to you this week. Dissect it, but think about it. Think about what you believe, what you think. Is there legitimacy to this? And if so, what is it? How would you articulate it? Is there a need to articulate it? Is have we been a byproduct of it? Right? Have I been a byproduct of this very theory if I believe that there's truth and relevance in it? Okay? So in this, have a great third week case study. Let's see. Let me pull this up real quick. I believe that this week is the week that you get to write a case study. I am looking at that real quick. I may just send out an announcement because my Blackboard, let's see if I can find it real quickly. What's going on? Okay, I'll have to send it to you. My computer is acting up, so I do apologize for that. I will send either another video message about that, or I will send an announcement. Just if you have any questions about that assignment, week 3, let me know. But if not, have a great week. Let me know your thoughts. Feel free to email me. Brady, I thought that was ridiculous. Brady, oh my goodness, that was awesome. Whatever it may be, let me know. I'd love to answer any questions you may have. Have a great third week, and talk to you soon. Thank you.